Today on Co-op for Two, we look at Stranger Things Upside Down, a cooperative game from Cool Mini or Not.
You're watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on our channel.
This is our review and discussion of Stranger Things Upside Down. Before we get started, let's go down to the table and see how this game plays.
In Stranger Things Upside Down, players will win if they complete all 3 Rescue Will objectives. They will rescue Will and win the game. Players will lose the game if any player at any time their fear track reaches the end, or if you go through the action deck 3 times, you will run out of time and lose the game. On a player's turn, you will first take a move action. You can move, you can play cards, which will allow you to move further. When you're done moving, you can take the action in whatever space you end up in. If you end up in a space with an enemy, such as the Demogorgon, you must fight the enemy. Actions include calming down, which is to lower your fear track. You can get items from the item deck, which will help you in your quest by adding pluses to your calm down or to fight or various other effects. You can request Eleven's help, who is not a playable character, but she has some very powerful one-time effects in the game. You can investigate the lab, which will allow you to play cards without penalty with the hazard symbol, which I'll get to in a moment. You can fight the Demogorgon as well. All of the tests or skill checks in this game revolve around the concept of you will play a number of cards from your hand, count up how much, whatever value you have, and then you will look at whatever test you were trying. So if you're trying this test here, this will say 5. So if you had played these 6, you would win. If you had only played 4 and you had the 2 and the 3, you would have failed the test, but you will randomly remove one of these tokens, and now you will know that this test will be a lot easier. The amount of cards that you spend, you will draw up at the end of your turn, which is sort of accelerating your clock. So you can spend a lot of cards and guarantee success. However, you're shortening the game and you're making the game a little more difficult for yourself. You also have these allies here that you can recruit using the tests, the same sort of test, and they will provide you ongoing effects throughout the game. At the end of your turn, you will draw up your cards, and you will draw the number of cards from the event deck, and that depends on how far along you are in the act here and how many hazard cards you've drawn. They'll do things like move the Demogorgon to attack you, move the patrols around to make you lose cards, and various other effects based upon the events of Season 1 of Stranger Things. Players will continue playing until either you win or lose the game. Firstly, before we get started, what's your background here on? Because I think it's very important in this particular game.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so I really liked the first season of Stranger Things, second season, and then the last season I've hated. I can barely watch. So I guess I'm not a huge fan anymore of the IP.
I've seen the first season. I'm not much on shows, but this is kind of before I, and I don't really care about it either way. It really is very unimpactful to me. But I don't have any experience with the second season, which is noteworthy because this game covers Season 1 and Season 2.
Yeah, and I think there's something important to point out, maybe to frame this. Before we started filming, I said to Greg, this is like Horrified, Alien Nostromo. It feels like that licensed IP, that's what you might expect. But Greg said...
Absolutely not. Those games are really gateway-ish. They're mass market to some extent. They are mass market games. This has enough wrinkles, and we'll kind of get into it, that I feel like you're not going to give this to just somebody that's a non-gamer.
I think that's important because on the face of it, you might expect that, but really there are some gamey elements here. Whether they all work or not, this is a game that is going to be for more experienced gamers.
I think there's a number of things that are not intuitive. I think once you played it, I think it's fine, but I think there's just a few wrinkles about it that just make it a little harder entry.
Both in terms of rule complexity and in terms of strategy.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So before we get too much further in, let's just kind of give a quick overview of just the components, how we feel about the components. They come with a number of miniatures. We should note that the miniatures we have here are painted. There's some Demogorgon ones. There's a number of characters from the first season. There's a Demogorgon, and then this game comes with a double-sided board. So you have the first side is season 1. On the opposite side of this is a season 2 board, and it comes with a separate event deck, sort of driving the villain phase or whatever you want to call it, and then a separate ally deck as well.
Which
and then
seems the same as the first season.
Very similar. There are some differences. And then there's those Demogorgon pups or whatever. Demodogs. The first season has just the one Demogorgon, and it has its own deck of those two as well, which is kind of neat. But they share all other components are shared. The miniatures are actually really well done. I think they look really great, and the artwork is pretty evocative of those characters. And the components, it's like a $50 game or so. I think.
Oh, really?
Full retail. You know, so the components are pretty well done. I think there is one kind of weird thing we'll kind of get into a little bit about but that's more an ease of play type thing. But yeah, the art looks good. The miniatures look great. Really well done miniatures. I think. Cool Mini or Not, of course, very well known for that. In general, it's a good production, I think, and for the price point especially. It's not quite as good as those Sparrow Hall type games that Jesse had mentioned before, but I think...
Yeah, I expect the price will come down quite a bit, too. Let's talk a little bit about ease of play and rules. First of all, as we've alluded to, the rules, there are some subtle, weird complexities to the rules. The setup is non-trivial. It's not all on the board, so you have to constantly refer to the rule book. There is some fiddliness with setting up the tokens and managing the tokens. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is kind of like a system that I've seen it in the games before. I can't really think of anything right now, but sometimes, you'll have like a stack that you have to pull from a stack of cardboard, like tiles. So if you're playing like an exploration style game, you'll have to pull one from that stack, and sometimes they go back into the stack, and you can kind of shuffle them up and just pull from the middle or whatever. This is a bit weird because you have this pool of tokens, that have these numbers on them. And you would think like, you could throw them into a bag and that would make them easier to reach in and pull out things. But then, of course, if you reach in and pull it out, you might see the value, and you should not know the values of these things. And because through the game, when they're removed from the board, they're going back into the pool, it's kind of weird because you want to shuffle them, but you have to leave them all face down. And that's a very fiddly, weird thing. There's no, and when I was thinking like, is there a way to is there any way to do this differently? Yeah. And oftentimes I'll leave them in a big stack, but that's not really doable here. So it's a weird mechanism here, and it's like, there's no easy solution around it. It's very fiddly and a little bit weird, and I wish there was a good solution.
And I think that fiddliness carries through to a lot of these different mechanisms. There's a lot of setup that's not, there's no iconography on the board. You have to constantly refer to the rules. And I think this gets back to the thing about, is it one of these gateway games? Because clearly, whenever there was the decision to be made about, do we make it more gamey and at the added complexity of rules, or do we make it more streamlined, they always went to the more complicated gaminess. And the rulebook leaves a lot to be desired. There's no player aids, which you really could use in this game, because your player turn is a little odd about when you refresh cards.
They have the... on the back of the rule book.
But then there's some weirdness about setting up where certain stacks you turn over the top, certain ones you don't, and how many to initialize, and these cards tell you how many tokens get put in this stack. Lots of little details that you have to refer back in the rule. The starting locations, none of that is on the board the way you normally would see. Lots of little things, and we had questions. We had questions about how an ally would work, or how a power would work, or whether a card, when it recycles. And very hard to find that stuff in the rulebook for such a sort of simple, streamlined game. Surprisingly, a lot of details like that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, where I think that like that initial hurdle of getting your mind around some of this, like, because it's a little, it's not quite what a normal game feels like. Like, it feels like they're doing a few things differently, which is great. I like the idea that they would try some different things or whatever. But because it's a little less intuitive, it's a little harder to jump in. But then once you do, I found the game flowed pretty easily and
I think that's fair.
and fine. It's just that little bit of a getting your brain around. But I do agree with you that like there were when it came to the allies and some of the timing on some of the cards for like the event cards at the end of the round that you reveal that are the negative effects. There's a bunch of times where we're like, how would that work exactly? What's the timing there? And there's no like appendix or anything like that.
Hard to find answers to questions.
And a lot of times you can look things up, via Board Game Geek. But I think a lot of people that are going to be interested in this game are not going to be in, they're going to be like maybe non-gamers. They're not going to have ever heard of Board Game Geek. And we couldn't even find some of the answers to the questions that we had through the game. And so that's a little bit of for this kind of, I would think your primary market for this kind of a game, I would guess that would be, that wouldn't be the kind of person, you know what I mean? That's kind of a mismatch, I think.
Yeah, I do agree with you, though. Once you start playing it a couple times, you do see all the cards, you do get used to them. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the actual decisions involved in playing the game. To me, this is where things get weird for this game. You've got this hand size, your hand set of cards that you're normally in a game like this, you've got this hand of cards, and the tricky decision is how to use those cards. This game is really weird in that that's like the least interesting thing. That feels like almost totally on automatic. You've got 5 cards and you're just going to use however many you can to virtually guarantee you'll succeed, or with a high likelihood. There's no real interesting decision. There's no multi-use cards. They're the most boring things about this game. This is what they look like. There's nothing to it. They're just numbered from 1 to 3. They're all the same. Some have little hazards on them. Some have walkie-talkies.
It's very small decisions.
Wow.
In terms of like, there's a walkie-talkie on some, meaning they're good for being in a space with someone else. And then there's the hazard, which is kind of set up so that any of the hazard ones you play increases the amount of cards you draw at the end of the round.
But what's so bizarre about that is you've got your 5 cards. You're going to use that walkie-talkie card. You're going to use that hazard card eventually. That's the only way it gets out of your hand. You can't use it for anything else. There's no actions that tell you discard cards. So you're like, I'm going to use it now or later.
There are. So I think, if I can jump in real fast here, I think what's actually really one of the more interesting parts of the design space of this game, I think, is the fact that you have that deck is your clock. You go through this deck 3 times, and then the game is over. And so you can go slowly. You can spend just a couple of cards. So it's kind of has a push your luck feel. And then like the least amount of cards that you spend, the longer the game will be, and the less time, because when you go through the deck once and you drop to 5, so if you spend all 5, every single round you're going to go through the game a lot faster. And you get to the second, when you get through the deck, the first pass, then you start drawing 2 of these cards, the enemy cards at the end of the round, and then 3, and then the game's over. So it's directly tied to the clock.
Well, it's absolutely true that the clock is a very interesting, constant thing happening that you're worrying about. But when you face a threat, you can't be like, I'm going to only play 1 card, because that'll kill you if you push your luck. So really, you ask yourself, how many cards do I need to spend? And then you lament that you're advancing the clock fast. But you really are not making an interesting choice about using those cards. That's very strange to me. The interesting choices here, so like it feels like almost all of the tactical decisions are trivial. You're in a fight, you're just like, how many gives me a reasonably good chance of winning this fight? That's how many cards I'll play. I'll just add up my cards and play that many. Where the decisions are more interesting, and they are interesting, are sort of the higher level decisions. When do we switch from bulking up on allies and items to this? How do we make a rush for this? How strong do we have to be? Those decisions are fascinating.
I really like the idea of the time clock. I think it's very interesting, the fact that like you can spend fewer cards, go slower, and that's your life. It's kind of like there was this old comic book Spawn way back in the day. Obviously, it's still going now probably, but like I remember he has like this finite amount of like strength or life, and he can use these really powerful stuff. But once his life counter is gone, he's done, right? And I like it's the same kind of thing where you have like you can spend a lot of your actions, but you're going to speed through the deck a lot faster. I'm not saying that like it's like in the moment. I just think it's kind of a cool little part of it.
You're definitely right that there's a huge push your luck element on every action. When you're engaging in a fight or a test, you're having to decide, should I throw all of my cards at it and guarantee success? And you're absolutely right that if you do that, you're going to run out your clock too quickly. And Greg is particularly good at those clock things, but one of the things you said, the moment we realized that on our first playthrough, you said, this is going to be difficult for a non-gamer, because that's the kind of subtle thing that someone who's not experienced won't realize, that you're speeding through the clock, which is going to get you killed.
So we played some games where, like, I think the World of Warcraft pandemic and the Star Wars pandemic, where it has this kind of a neat system of like, you roll dice, but like there's either shields or hits. And if you have a lot of hits, you'll eliminate the enemies and you'll win. But if you have a lot of shields, you won't eliminate the enemies, but you'll block the hits that they're coming back in. And so it's kind of a nice little balance. And I think this game has like a very cool, interesting little system that I've not really seen before, which is that like in order to win, like your challenges, you have to, you don't know in the beginning, what some of these are. Later on, they'll come out completely face down. But when you take this test, if you fail the test, it's kind of cool because you eliminate one of these tokens. You don't know which one, but one of them will leave, and now the test will be easier. So you've made some headway, which is pretty cool. And then you have a little more information about, like, you're like, okay, well, look, there's if this test was a 3 and a 4, well, now it's 7. If we failed it, well, now we know next time that it's going to be either a 3 or a 4. And that's when there's more tokens, it's kind of interesting. So it's like at least you're getting some consolation prize, right? Like you're not completely like, well, I failed. It's not like a die roll where it's like, well, I failed, I'll have to try it again on my next turn. This one, you're like, well, I failed, but it's going to be easier the next time, and then it just keeps getting easier and easier every time. Which is really kind of a cool little system.
There are a bunch of clever things happening. Yes, it's that you get a little compensation for trying, and you get information revealed, and that really does add this little other dimension when you're pushing your luck. The only weird thing there is that if I love the idea of games where you can pay for information. We play in Danger. It has that feel too, where you can pay to get goals revealed, and there are actions, special actions that help you reveal stacks. I love that idea of having to take actions. The one thing though that sort of throws a monkey wrench there is I frequently, when we play, I'm like, well, let's just attack that so that we can gain the information. But part of the problem, and this is a problem we have in bigger ways in this game, is that if you get unlucky, you take wounds based on how wrong,
or
how
fear is what they call it.
you take fear based on how far off you are, and it means that it really forces you to play a lot safer than you otherwise would, because in lots of games you would push your luck and be like, oh my god, we completely messed that up, but that just means a fail. In this game, if you completely mess it up, you end the game instantly, and that really forces you to play much more cautiously than you might otherwise play.
So there's some interesting things that you can. So this is kind of about replayability. I'm kind of have to bleed into that a little bit. But
whenever we start these reviews, Greg is like, you got to stay in the lane. We're doing this topic. But when Greg wants to drift off to a different topic.
Well, I think it just because it's sort of talked about. So there's some actions. There's an action to say, like, I'm going to reveal the tops of a number of different stacks, because as the stacks are replenished and come back out, you don't know what they are. But if you're eating through your clock by using your cards, then if you want to move to the location, you spend a card or whatever to get further, to move to the location to reveal the stacks, and then you have to go, take that action to burn through cards to reveal the stacks. Most of the time, it seems like it makes more sense just to go right to the test and just do it. Throw whatever cards you were going to move and turn over stacks just to complete that stack, because you'll find out the information and you'll get rid of them. It just seems like makes much more sense just to do it that way. And because of that, there's a lot of this game that seems like it's kind of scripted in a way where it seems like your actions and choices, there aren't that many. It's pretty sandbox. You can do whatever you want kind of thing.
You mean there are clear actions that are better than others. It's absolutely true. We play this game and we're like, you just bulk up on allies first. That's clear. There are a lot of pieces, and the characters are the same thing. We look at those characters like, Joyce should not be in this game, only if you want to make the game more difficult. There's lots of times when it seems there's a clear answer. I think that's absolutely true. Although, this has to do with whether your audience is gamers or not. One of the interesting things is, when we do play this game, it's not infrequent that I'm like, I want to do that. And Greg's like, look, let me point out why that's clearly the wrong move. So maybe if you're an experienced gamer, a lot of these choices are going to be like, that's stupid. No one should ever go there. But maybe if you're not as experienced, some of those choices are more appealing than others.
I think that's usually what we look at as a sign of a good game, is when we both look at, when if I say, hey, this is what I think the plan should be, and then Jesse says, well, can I point this out instead? And then we kind of come to the middle, take some from each plan. And that's really the sign of a good game. And we do kind of do that a little bit, so there is some discussion.
Sure.
But, I mean, to shift into this sort of replayability thing, it seems like, now, and I think this is kind of what happens if you make a game that you want to make very thematic to some kind of source material. Like this is season 1, back is season 2. I'm guessing we could expect to see some expansions that do the other seasons. But it's like, if you want it to be that season of the show, you're giving up the freedom on the other side to make the mechanisms and the gameplay a little more interesting. And I think being avid gamers and looking at this, it seems pretty clear, and maybe don't listen to this part if you want to explore the game on your own, but it seems pretty clear. You go get all the allies immediately, just go and just boom, 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 boom. Then go over, get yourself a couple items, and then you have to knock out the Demogorgon a bunch until these stacks are gone, and then you go rescue, and then you go start working on the rescue well things. And it seems like that's the thing to do to win. Spending time on some of these more actions that I don't think really help, like revealing the stacks and things like that. I mean, calming down is a big action that you're supposed to do, but we didn't do that at all on the first season, really. And the second season is a little more swinging. We could talk about that, but it seems like the game, it's not scripted like you have to do this, but if you're gonna have a realistic chance of
that's right.
winning the game, it's kind of like saying look, you could do this, or or you could do this other thing that doesn't really make any sense and hurts your chances.
And it does feel like the structure of the event cards really does make it feel like it's stages. You've got your stage 1, and then you have to shift to doing this. When you clear that out, then you make those cards not as bad. It does feel like there's sort of a right way to do things and a right set of characters to take.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like they give you a pile of nails, a hammer, and a couple of boards, and you're like, well, we could do this another way, but I mean, it seems kind of like this is the way you would do it.
I agree, although it is kind of fun. We talked about, could we break this game by trying we have some interesting ideas. Could you try to circumvent?
I did have a
Could you try to sort of focus all your energy in this weird way and get around it?
Sorry.
So, there's something I wanted to talk about regarding a big issue that you often bring up is play length, and does the style of the game match the play length? And I think there's one disconnect for me here, which is You couldn't instantly lose this game. You could get a bad turn, push your luck, or get bad cards, especially towards the end of the game, and end up unlucky and get one too many damage, fear, and end the game. And I think if it was a shorter game, that would be a little more appealing to me. But the idea of playing an hour and a half game and getting to the last thing and getting 3 unlucky cards, because by the time you get to the end, you're drawing 3 cards. You could get very unlucky there and all of a sudden have the game end through essentially what's almost unpredictable.
I think that like this game, I mean, even though it's unintuitive and I hate this little pile of tokens, there's no really, it's a very cumbersome, like fiddly system, but it's really cool in terms of like, because of the way we are, I don't want to roll dice and just be like, okay, well, that's what I got. And now this is what I got. You can get some information. You can get rid of, one of the tokens when you complete the test, or whether if you fail the test, you get rid of one of the tokens or you succeed. It's a really cool gamery system. It's fantastic, despite the fiddliness to the, But I mean, I think that randomness is pretty interesting and not like it's you can do something about it, right? Like you can, that's cool. But I do think like the way that the cards work, like, and again, like I think there's this push-pull, we didn't really talk about, if you play these hazard symbol cards, for every one that you play, like you have to draw an extra card, and that's insanely punishing. So it seems like there's this laboratory, and if you can remove these, then you can play these cards without punishment. And again, that just seems like that's a thing to do. Like that's one of the first things you do. So you can play those cards more freely. That kind of adds to that scripted nature of it. But like, these cards, as Jesse said, I think, like you could just get very, very unlucky, and for your game length, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like all the tokens have randomness, but you can wrap your head around it. Whereas the event cards, which come out, especially when there are multiple cards, those are very swingy.
Yeah, I think like, and so since we're kind of talking a little bit about the replayability too, if I can just pivot really fast into the characters, and we kind of mentioned this, like some of the characters are just terrible. Like they're just you would only take them for if you want to give yourself a little bit of a handicap to make the game a little harder, maybe. I think some of the characters are clearly very, very good, and some of them are clearly very, very bad. Well, clear, I should say to us. But a lot of times when we go into a game like this, we like the idea that variable player powers means that like, hey, we're going to play this game with these characters completely different than we played the last time.
That's a good
and
point.
that is not the case here. You're going to play basically the same game each time.
You're right.
And not to get too much into final thoughts, but I mean, like, I think this is what happens when you have a very, very thematic game that's chained to kind of a strict series of events in a show or a movie or whatever, and you're giving up a lot of that freedom in terms of the gameplay in order to make the thematic ties make more sense. And I think this game goes kind of heavier into that, and I feel like this is the kind of game like you're going to play this once or twice or 3 times, and then you're going to be like, that's it, I don't ever need to play this again. Because these characters are not giving you a different way to play.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about wanting to play it over and over again. I'm not sure if the reason is because tying to the IP and the theme, whatever consequences, but I do agree with you that it's sort of, once you play it once, you've sort of seen it, you've seen what happens. Once you've solved the puzzle, which is a higher level puzzle of what strategy to do and when to shift gears. Once you've solved that, sort of the details of running it through become much less appealing.
I mean, that being said, like the themes is cool. Like the laboratory you go, you have to investigate it so you can play more of these cards. That's kind of cool. Getting these patrols off, you can get one of them off the board. That's very helpful because like they're constantly moving around to get you. The Demogorgon's there. The fact that there's an upside down part of the board, which is more dangerous than the normal like Hawkins side or whatever. That's very cool. The fact that 11 is not playable in this game, but she is like occasionally, like, because she's sort of not with the group or whatever, during the first season. She's kind of there. She's not a player character. I don't know how to say it, but like, it's like you can use
They do have a downloadable player character
you
could get if you wanted to play 11.
But but you get to use her, if you try to use her powers, like they're very potent, and I think that's a very cool thing. It's help 11. You help her and she like uses her massive power to like do something really game breakingly good, and I think that's very, very cool. And then the allies seem very thematic from what I remember. There's most of them, I don't remember what their part is, but I can imagine that a true fan of the show would be very, very excited about that. And the fact that you can like each of the locations, like the police place, you gather info. Like I think that's kind of cool. I mean, I know that's not like a huge deal, but I think what you're getting in terms of the thematics like is very, very cool, and a fan of the show is really going to like that. But I think, as I said before, I think you give up a lot by having that.
Well, there's something interesting here about, I do think that, so we should say Rob Daviau is the designer of this game, who we've debated. Daviau and Leacock made Pandemic, which is our favorite game, and we've talked about whether Daviau is the hack and Leacock is the real genius. It's a little hard to tell from this. I think the jury is still out. But one thing that it does seem is happening here is that this does have game optimization stuff favored over the thematic. So like one example of that is like the allies. We've talked about the Captain is Dead deck phenomena where you see every ally. You play this game, you get all the allies. They're small little powers. So it's not like a game where you're like, oh my God, I've got this character, this ally is going to change the whole way I play the game. No, you play this, you get every ally. You got all 6, you see them every time you play, and you're just figuring out high-level ways to use them. But you don't really, to me, it's not like I feel any of these things are changing the game. There's a deck of items that are just as boring as the action cards, right? It's +1, +2, or +3.
Yeah, but they're kind of...
Everything is very minimal. And then look at all the locations. What are they? They've got names, but really half of them say get item. One says get item +1. One says recruit ally. I mean, they're very boring in that sense. Only these special places where you can help 11, which does these different things. But it's pretty easy to move around. It is, you have to spend actions. You are worried about getting around. But everything is very sort of balanced in favor of like making the game balanced rather than like making these big, exciting things. You're never taking big, exciting moves. And the enemies, you've got this Demogorgon, you have these big giant enemies. What happens if they go in your space? Now you just move away from them the next turn. You don't have to fight them ever.
No, you do if you want to do an action.
If you want to move to their space and do an action, but if you don't, you don't. They're not, it's weird that the enemies...
They block you. If you go into a space with an enemy, you have to fight the enemy. You can't do an action.
That's right, but it's a good example of, rather than having a thematically scary, eventful thing, it's just like, it's designed to force you to optimize around them. And I think that's what it feels to me. This almost feels like to me, I guess, it feels like this theme is not like the characters have their names, but I'm not sure it really feels thematic, like you're recreating the show.
I kind of
to
disagree.
me.
That's so let's talk about season 2 real fast.
Sure.
So I think it's really, really cool that you flip the board over and you have an entirely different scenario, which is pretty awesome. You have a different deck. Well, I mean,
is it really that different though, Greg?
I mean, there are differences to it. I mean, it's not like night and day. It's the same basic game, which is cool. I just think it's neat that they have a secondary deck.
Sure.
Secondary ally deck, which is mostly the same as we said. But the problem with this...
It doesn't feel that different. It doesn't feel that different.
There are some differences. It's not significantly different, but it does... I mean, again, I don't know. I haven't watched the second season, so... But I will say that the second season is way swingier. A lot of the cards that come out, if you've done some of the things, they're complete whiffs. But you could draw a couple of those cards, and if you get the wrong combo, you could end the game like that just by drawing off the deck. And that's kind of a feel bad. And I noticed that a lot of the actions and the things that go on in that create a much swingier game, which is not really what
I would agree with that. And I would also say that it doesn't add anything.
Yeah.
That season 2 doesn't add anything to this game. It's a little bit of a difference, but much swingier and nothing new. Nothing, a little different. A little different, yes, but everything is the same. I mean, it's different. The details are different, but all of your strategy and thinking and the way you approach the game is exactly the same, and it doesn't really add anything.
Yeah,
these cards are all quite forgettable.
Yeah.
Most of these cards are the dogs move and attack you.
Yeah. I think the biggest miss here is like the player powers really like don't change the game up.
I think that's a really important point.
That's the biggest miss because I think
really important point.
At the end of the day, you're not going to play this like over and over and over again because it's going to be way too similar, I think.
Yeah.
And again, like it's like feels scripted in the way where like you have to do certain actions, like you got to do stages of the game in the same kind of order, right? And in order to win, like, and you have to knock the Demogorgon down before you can rescue Will in the first season. That's just, you have to do it because that's just the way the game works, you know. And so you're going to go through the steps kind of in the same way. And that to me is kind of like another, like I say, it's you're playing through that season, so that could be exciting if you're a really big fan of the show. But I think, you know.
Okay, time for our final thoughts. For me, there are some very clever, very interesting things here. I'd like to see more iterations on this. To me, the little bit of the hesitation I have is thinking, who is this for? Because it's clearly got some real optimization and sort of non-intuitive things that for a non-gamer, they're going to have a hard time wrapping their head around. For a real gamer, I think, I shouldn't say real gamer. I've been criticized for saying I shouldn't say that. But for experienced gamers, I think this may wear out its welcome the way it kind of has for us once we've figured out what we think we should do. I think if you are sort of new to these games and it's not obvious what you should do, this could be fun. Like if you can wrap your head around the rules, and there's a little bit of a struggle, then you might be in a situation where where you lose it. Like we played both seasons, won both times. If you get lucky, though, and you're not that experienced with these kinds of games, I could see playing it and getting killed and being like, whoa, we don't know how to beat this game. That could be very fun, but you have to you have to be right in the right window there for that to happen for you. For me, I feel like there's very little reason to play it again, except, as I was telling Greg, there is this little thought in the back of my head, like, we think we know how to beat it. We do know how to beat it. And there's no difficulty level settings on this. That's another hit against it. But I am a little curious about saying, like, can we go against our strategy? Like, we know how to win. Now, what if we try to do something completely different? And I am curious about that. So that's the only thing that bumps my score up a little bit. So I'm going to give it 6 for not playing it as an experiment, and maybe a 7 with the experimental attack on it. I would like to see more games, more evolution of the system, though.
Yeah, I think it's in a weird space because I think like it seems like the kind of game that should be for non-gamers and for just people that are fans of the show and maybe not avid gamers. But for us, you know, there's enough fiddly stuff in here that kind of prevents that, I think. So it's an odd little mismatch of type of person that might be drawn to this. I really love this, even though it's fiddly, I love the idea of making these tests. It's such a cool system, and then you're making it easier if you fail. I love that system. I wish it could be a little less fiddly somehow. I think that, you know, I think another real big miss here is that the characters and the way that you can approach playing it multiple times, you know, that's not really there for me. I think the game, it seems to be quite thematic, and it felt like that first season that I've seen, you know. But for me, like, even though I think it's a very solid game, I don't see that I would want to play this like again, because I feel like we played it, we figured out how to play it. There's not a lot of wiggle room to play it differently, and so I don't really feel the need to revisit it. And I think that's kind of the real problem there. Although you can play both sides, but as Jesse mentioned, there's not a huge amount of difference there. So I think I'm probably going to give this a 6.5. I guess that's where I'm landing on it.
So we both come down.
Yeah, it's worth playing. It's a good game. It's a solid game. Looks great. I think it's very thematic. However, there's not a lot of room for replayability there.
Yeah, I wish they had figured out.
It seems like there is a best strategy, and almost like an only strategy to me.
I wish they had figured out a way to make the actual turn-by-turn decisions more interesting.
And I think that clock is kind of interesting too. As we said, you can spend those cards, but you're kind of going through your clock, so kind of interesting there. But yeah, there you have it.
Okay, you might check out our quick before you buy. Oh, it's too late now if you watch this. It's too late for the quick before you buy. All right, well, we'll see you on the next video then. Is this in the review? This is like, I can't tell. Are we in the review? Is this live or are we talking?
We were gonna do a quick before you buy.
But now, is this on camera? Is this in the review?
This is not
we're
real
off.
Life.
We're offline.
We're off.
I have
complete. We're gonna utilize the top down.
We are going to use the top down. I mean, we're going to cut to the top down.
There are some interesting things in terms of like, there are some.
You're not talking about the game now, are you?
A little bit.
Let's just do our review. You can talk to me about it on the review.
It's very thematic, but I think in the terms of it gives you in creating a very thematic journey through Stranger Things season 1 and then Stranger Things.
You were fine. You could have recovered it, but okay.